Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Better Events podcast. We are so excited to talk to you today about 7 ways to show gratitude at events. It's that time of year. We're going to talk all about gratitude. So let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm your co-host, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson. And before we jump into this topic all about gratitude at events, and specifically 7 different ways you can express gratitude at events, keeping with our Thanksgiving holiday theme, we do want to first remind you that we have the Better Events Conference coming up in December next month on Wednesday, December 20th. Tickets are still on sale. We have general admission as well as VIP that includes a little more, or I guess friend of the pod as we're calling it, a little more interaction with Mary and I, as well as some other awesome bonus features. We do encourage you to get your tickets while you can. It's going to be an amazing day. And I think before we continue, Mary, we love to start with our conversation starter. So Mary, if you could host a talk show, who would be your first guest?
This is a great question. I would maybe say Malala or I don't know, someone like funny, like some comedy person who I cannot
2
identify
very
at this
different
time.
answers.
I know, right? Both would be memorable though, right?
They would.
Yeah. What about you?
Mine would be RuPaul. I would
Oh,
just
I thought you were gonna go sports.
Nope, I would just love to that was like I feel like for a talk show yes, everyone listeners know I'm a big sports fan. I feel like I'd wanna interview a player, but I also feel like I just like to hang out with RuPaul. If I'm a talk show host, it's like, let's go with someone who I know. Not to say they'd be an easy guest, but RuPaul has their own talk show, so they just would be a very good guest.
Totally. Yeah, that'd be fun. Speaking of fun things, we also have our topic for today, which is 7 ways to show gratitude at events. And we chose this topic because it's an expansion of our conversation that we had this time last year, which is episode 82, if you'd like to refer back to it, which was expressing gratitude at events. And we're going to talk about that, but we're going to expand on it a little bit today. So we'll just go ahead and get into it. We hope that you all are feeling this cool November day. Maybe the leaves are falling. Maybe it depends where you live. Maybe it's not like that at all. But get your November vibes and think about gratitude. So, our first question for today is, what are we grateful for with events? What a good place to start, Logan. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, keeping with, tomorrow's Turkey Day, we're going to be thinking of a lot about what we're grateful for. So, I feel like in events, I'm grateful for the opportunity to always be learning and being challenged. I feel like one of the things that drew me to the industry is that I can always learn something new. It feels good to do stuff that you're good at, but like no matter what or how long you've been in this industry, I feel like you're going to hear from everyone that they're like, I always can learn something new. And that's how you know like good planners are open to that. And so I'm very grateful because it keeps me on my toes. I feel like I'm constantly growing both as a person and as a professional, for just, being able to have to roll with it. Mary, how about you? What are you grateful for?
I love change. I get bored easily. So, I also am just grateful for the different types of experiences that we get to have with different people, and then just like straight up different experiences, different content, different programs. To me, that keeps me on my toes, and I just have had so many times during an event, like, yes, it's crazy, but I will typically have this moment when it's all coming together, when I'm like, wow, how cool that I get to be a part of something like this. And that's something that I have to remember. I will say it is challenging to identify that sometimes, but that is something that I think keeps bringing me back for more.
I couldn't agree more. Look at these good fuzzy feelings, listener. If you're feeling them too, I mean, I feel like I could keep going of like grateful for the people. I'm grateful for, like you said, the opportunities, the places I've gotten to go. But I think just to drill down for this week's topic, as Mary mentioned, this is something we've already talked about, but wanted to kind of dive into the different types of gratitude or maybe types of people or groups that you're going to come into contact with at your event and how you can, express gratitude to them. We'll tackle maybe some of the little like thorny, debatable topics that come up with thanking some of these people. So we'll talk everything about attendees, talking about if your client or maybe your boss, talk about event vendors, teams, volunteers. It's going to be great. But Mary, I feel like we got to start first with attendees. So often at events, you're going to see attendee gifts or attendee favors if it's a social event. And I feel like, Mary, I really want to know what you have to say to this question. But like, how do you feel about favors or gifts for attendees? And I feel like this is a hot topic because at weddings, I feel like you see a lot of people saying that wedding favors are dead. Guests don't want them. Mary, what do you think?
I'm conflicted because when I was employed full time, we tried to always do gifts on the way out. And it was something sometimes as small as like there's this local cookie that's really good, and we would have those that like a guest could just pick up and take on their way out, like something like that. And I liked that because to me it's that moment of like surprise and delight, and it also wasn't a lot of work. Like it was just something easy to implement that I hope people thought was nice as they left. So I like it. I also don't think that we need to get too wrapped up about it. Like as you're planning an event, if this is something that's going to take like a lot of lift or there are just other things that you have to be focusing on, I would say that this maybe doesn't have to happen. I don't think it's going to impact a person coming back to your event again, but it's certainly a nice to have if you can. That's probably the easiest way I would summarize it. But then just the other day, I had a client who was like trying to decide if they should do this. And I was like, it was a fundraiser. So I was like, that's not going to make them give more money. And you're trying to save money. So I'm going to say, don't do it. And they didn't do it. And it was fine. But, so I go back and forth. But Logan, what do you think about attendee gifts and favors?
Well, you sparked an idea, Mary. I feel like we should go through, as we go through this list, be saying if it's a nice to have or a must have, or maybe there's somewhere in the middle. But I feel like I'm going to agree with you that attendee gifts and favors are a nice to have. I feel like I follow a lot of what people say about wedding favors specifically, like no one really cares. It's not the memorable part of your event. That being said, I mean, I've always had a very stark opinion about food at weddings where no one remembers what they ate for dinner, but they're going to remember the late night snack. Or to your point, you said it, at your past, you gave out cookies as a like favor as people left. I love that. I do remember a friend's wedding where they were giving out soft pretzels. And you know me, I love a soft pretzel. This was a Philly wedding and they had soft pretzels and bottles of water as you left. It was genius. It was so smart. Like who doesn't want that at the end of a long night? Some pretzels and water to go home with. And so I agree with you. I think it is a nice to have. It's not a must have. It's often why I think it gets a bad rap is because it's usually a big cost, and that usually is a negative. So if it's not a measurement of success, now like an exception where it might be more into the must have would be like a corporate event where maybe it's an internal, you're trying to motivate your employees to do something or hit new, metrics for next year if it's like your sales team or something. That's where I would think about having attendee gifts, but thinking about like one client I had like a merch, not a shop per se, but they let you like go in and pick from multiple different items. And that was kind of interesting because it was more choose your own adventure and people then could opt into what they actually want. Because I feel like that's where a lot of attendee gifts or favors are missed because it's either, a tchotchke, something small that people don't really care about. Or it's just like, it is a big cost, but it's just one of those, like, who needs another water bottle? So that's, I think, something to think about is like, is it a value add? And then how much choice are you giving people or meeting a need they might have in that moment at your event?
So let us know what you think about attendee gifts. I'm interested, listeners, to hear your thoughts as well. But it is a nice way, as Logan said, to express gratitude. So,
hey there, friend. Are you wondering how you can get more awesome content from Mary and I and the Better Events podcast community? Or maybe you've been loving what we talk about with community over competition and you really want to figure out how you can connect with other event pros? Well, Mary and I are going to be hosting the Better Events conference in December this year, December 20th. And we're so excited because we launched our early bird ticket sales and you can take advantage of this special pricing all the way up through the end of this month in October. hurry, run, don't walk. We've got a really cool general admission offer, but we also then have a fun friend of the pod VIP offer that just involves a little more higher touch experience with Mary and I, but we've got something for you. We even have student tickets. If you are someone who is currently studying and looking to maybe invest a little less, but still want to join us, we've got a ticket for you. Again, we're just so excited. If you can't hear it in my voice or see it on my video on our YouTube, this has been so exciting to put this together and start to see people already purchasing tickets, investing in themselves, because we are going to have a magical day on Wednesday, December 20th, where we all are going to get to meet each other, connect with each other, and all learn about how we can create and host better events in 2024 so that you can make next year the best year ever. So click the link in our show notes, go over to our social media. Our Instagram's probably our most active. Get your tickets. We cannot wait to meet you.
Our second section are speaker gifts and honorariums. I have had a lot of trouble with these over the years. Let me say that. But Logan, tell me, what do you think about speaker gifts and honorariums? What's the difference and when do you use them?
So the difference, I would say an honorarium is usually a fancy way for saying speaker fee. Mary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes it's not necessarily the fee the speaker sets. It might just be the conference or the event itself might say, hey, we have a couple, $200 as an honorarium for each of our speakers or something like that. So it's usually money. And then gifts, again, could really fall into any part of that category. I don't know if there's really a rhyme or reason to where you use one or the other. I think for me, my biggest thing is I would like to make this a must have. I would really like you to always thank your speakers. And even if it's as small as a thank you card, and Mary knows I always default that I'm like a Starbucks gift card. It's so easy. It's so low hanging fruit. You could do it virtually too. Something small just means you're acknowledging the time they gave and their expertise. But I do think if you're going to pay, you need to be consistent. So I do think honorarium sometimes instead of a speaker fee is where organizations can be like, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're really big and famous or, the smaller, lesser known speaker, we have a set honorarium. It's just it's X dollars that we're going to give each of you. And so I would just encourage you to make sure it's even and that you're not paying one, much more than somebody else or paying some and not paying others.
I think that's a great tip because there was an event that I was a part of where they were deciding honorariums and I can't remember exactly how it happened, but someone asked for more. And so they gave that person more, but they gave the other speakers the original agreed upon amount. And that to me felt wrong, honestly, and how it happened. I think they should have said no. Not that we didn't appreciate their time. I just didn't think that was a fair thing. If you're gonna do an honorarium, make it fair, right? That's an honorarium. It's not payment for their services. But yeah, so I completely agree. But then Logan, we spoke at a conference locally and we got little local tea packets. Do you remember that? And
Yeah.
that was super nice. I wasn't expecting that. And so for something like that, I thought that was just it was a surprise for me and I really appreciated it. That was nice.
Yeah, I think it is just something showing that you're acknowledging the effort spent and the expertise. And this is just something I think is so easy to do. Back to my Starbucks gift card again, insert whatever business you like, but I'm like, Starbucks has them digitally. It takes me 2 seconds to send someone a $10 gift card. And even the smallest organizations, I'm like, you can do that.
Totally. Yeah, and someone asked me that the other day too. This is bringing back a lot of recent memories, but they said I think they were like, we're just gonna give a gift card to this nearby restaurant or something like that. And they're like, but is that even exciting? I was like, actually, yes, because they'll actually use it. So that's
Yeah.
great.
No, and that's why I was like, it's one where I'm like, I would shop smaller, but my teams and the events I work sometimes are all over the country. And so I often go, I'm like, Starbucks is everywhere. I had one speaker who was British once or a colleague who was British that I gave him a Starbucks gift card and was like, I'm sorry, I don't think it works in the UK, but when you come back to America, you can have a coffee on me. So yeah, I think that's a nice touch, but something I think just goes a long way. But I think, Mary, did you answer about speaker gifts? Are they a must have or a nice to have for you?
Oh shoot, I'm torn on this. Nice to have, but I think it's veering on the you probably really should do it. But
Yeah.
it's nice
Well,
to have.
and it sounds like for you, it's a nice to have, but be consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Our next area we've got is sponsor thank you. So you can call them sponsors, you could call them partners, You could call them, because we had that lovely episode with Eventney all about, I think they call them artists and exhibitors. We all wear different names, but we're calling them sponsors for this purpose. But Mary, I feel like one of the ways to thank a sponsor, because often they're giving you money or services or something, is to not forget them in your post-event process. So how important is it to thank a sponsor by actually giving them some reports post-event of how many people saw their logo or came to their booth or came to your event? Like, how important is that?
I think it's important, and I do think it's easy to forget because, that post-event feeling that we all have where it's like, "I just wanna wrap this up." That is sometimes something really easy to not to or just to do, like, kind of lamely, and honestly, I don't think I've ever had a sponsor follow up about this type of thing, but they certainly appreciate it when you do give it to them. But this really goes to, like, benefits, right? If they this might be part of their benefits. And that's what's challenging to me about sponsor thank yous, not to like get too far off the question. Most of what they're doing, obviously, like without sponsorship, some events cannot happen. So they are crucial and they're important and we appreciate them. But also they get things in exchange. And to me, that is kind of the partnership, the thanking back and forth. Thank you for your money. Here's this in return. So, is there anything above and beyond that you need to do for that? Sometimes people do that, and that's to your purview, but for post-event reporting and communication, I think it's like it's a benefit that it should be included, but I don't know if it's a form of thanks. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think, Logan?
I feel like it kind of counts. I'm aligned with you where I don't think you need to have some formal kind of thanking system with your partners, but I just feel like that's sometimes a miss for organizers, is they're so focused on delivering all the pre-event and in-event deliverables or parts of the partnership, and then they forget about the post or managing expectations of how long it actually takes to get those reports and what reports you're sharing and all of that. Of just like, I feel like the biggest thank you to your sponsors is to not drop off the face of the earth right when your event ends, and not tell them exactly when you're going to be delivering those things. Like you mentioned, that would be like included in their package. I feel like I love as a bonus is it's really easy when you're sending out email communication to like thank your attendees and anything else post event, just to include all your partners one more time, all their logos or their names or however you've been, presenting them. That's like such an easy way just to get them a slightly more of an exposure. And maybe to your point, Mary, it's not a listed benefit explicitly, but just an easy way to show thank you and give you kind of, I don't know, some motivation for them for next year to return, like making sure their experience is still smooth even once the event's done.
Yeah, definitely. And to that point, I think I might have mentioned this like once or twice on other episodes, but something that is really nice to do for sponsors post event is to like 5 or 6 months out from the event, send them like an infographic or something you've created that's like, here's what we have been able to do because of your partnership and your sponsorship. And that is something unique. Most people don't do something like that. So that's definitely a good thank you even later on to your point of creating or having that relationship continue on. So I would say sponsor thank yous in one way or another must have. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a must have. It's a different kind of thank you than the other, speakers and attendees that we've talked about so far. But yes, I agree with you. It's also a must have.
And that then brings us to number 4 of who to thank. So this one is event vendors through tips. So who do you tip? When do you tip? All the things. Logan, tell us about tipping.
I feel like this is a can of worms that we could probably have an entire episode at some point about tipping, because the event industry is large and broad, and there are certain niches of the event industry where it is very normal, if not expected, to tip all your event vendors. And then there's I'll say weddings, social events maybe, but then it's also in like a corporate event, not as normal to get a tip, especially when there's lots of layers of agencies and people there that are working, that you as the end person, the producer, the vendor at the end, you are not getting a tip. So I think that is just like the context that I would think about. I know personally, as an event vendor, I've always enjoyed getting a tip. So I'd say when in doubt, if you can, tipping is great. But like it's more, I think, assumed with some of your F&B vendors, so your food and beverage. Like if you have a bartender at your event, leaving them, some kind of cash tip is a nice to have. Probably a must have for some of those roles, actually, now that I'll say that. And the rest of your vendors, it might be more of a nice to have. I know on my invoices, I have the option that people pay my invoices digitally, they can tip. probably had maybe one client take advantage of doing it that way. But Mary, how about you? How do you feel about who you should tip?
I am so conflicted about this. I know like you said with catering, that's like, you should be paying a gratuity that's not always included in the service charges, like that's something that should happen. And yeah, like once again, similar to what you said, weddings, it seems way more common. That's the only time I've ever been tipped by doing day of wedding coordination. Never have I been tipped any other time. Actually, I did catering on the side like years ago, and I was also tipped at that time. So I don't, for anything else, I just haven't really seen it happen that often. I don't think it hurts, but I don't think it's like required either, except for catering, which can I just say something for 1 second? And I'd love to
Say it,
hear your
Mary.
thoughts. Caterers are amazing. We couldn't do events without them. I super appreciate caterers. I love food, but let me say, why can caterers and like the service staff get tipped for like 4 hours of work when we put in 4 months of work and don't get tipped? I'm just wondering. I don't get it.
It's a fair question to ask because I feel like how I'm hearing you ask that is not saying you shouldn't tip them. It's saying if you're tipping those guys, you should also be tipping your longer term vendors, right? Is
Just
that what
wondering
I'm
what the
hearing?
reasoning is. Yeah.
I mean, I think part of it, I feel like, is just because it's the service industry. It's part of it, and I mean, honestly, I feel like people, it's factored in. Like it's factored in that you, as a catering staff, rely on tips for part of what you think you're going to make from a gig, versus vendors like you and I, like planners. We probably have factored that you're not going to tip us because, like you said, no one's tipped you before. That you're already, working that into your rates. But I agree with you. It's definitely interesting. I do think anybody for catering, I feel like a good rule of thumb where it turns into a must have to tip people is if any of your vendors had to move proverbial mountains to make you have a successful event. So again, that's where maybe your catering, it's more forward facing. Like if they do a really good job, you give more than the normal tip, or their bartenders really like worked the room and made sure there wasn't any lines on like an effort they had. But I'm also thinking like a florist who dealt with some last minute changes of some form and you feel like they really blew it out of the park, or your venue was like really extra helpful and they didn't have to be. Like those are great moments when you can surprise and delight your vendors and make the difference. I feel like if they went above and beyond.
I think that's a great point. I like that. Proverbial. How do you say that word?
Proverbial mountains.
Proverbial mountains.
Yes, we are
Yeah.
not moving any real mountains in the event industry. I mean, honestly, though, if you did need to move a mountain, I would call an event person to help me figure it out because there's going to be some coordination, probably engineering, but some coordination as well. All right. Our next group we have, which again, there's some overlap here, but I just think of them as their own category, would be like event staff and volunteers. So again, we touched on this in episode 82. It's linked here in our show notes if you want to go back and listen to Mary and my like larger discussion about some of this. But Mary, how do you like to thank event staff and volunteers?
I actually probably would say out of all of these categories, I would maybe say must have thank volunteers. I know I just took staff out of that, but volunteers for sure. People who are dedicating their time just out of the goodness of their hearts amaze me. Couldn't do it without them. Those are the people who I think we have to make sure we're thanking, which, like you said, we have an episode about it. Whether it's like gift cards, once again, super simple. We used to give out just $5 gift cards and a thank you card for every volunteer. And then once a year, we would do a volunteer party where we would invite all the volunteers that we worked with that year and like have a little party for them. And that was like a cherry on top type of situation. But yeah, I'm just so grateful for volunteers personally that I'm like, absolutely, we have to do something to thank them, which words are nice, but even a little bit more than that, I think is super nice.
Yeah, I'm going to echo everything. I think it is a must have for your volunteers. I also would like to put it in the must haves for staff, even though I know it's not always attainable. But to your point earlier, Mary, of why certain folks get tipped and others don't, I feel like in lieu of a tip, you should at least be thanking the people that are staffing your event, whether they worked 5 months on it or just that event day. But yes, thanking volunteers, I feel like is so important, especially because they're not getting paid. They're volunteering their time. And a lot of events really rely on volunteers to get things done. So, I mean, this can be even as simple. I've seen at events like where they get to that example I had before of, you're picking one item out of 5 if you're an attendee. Maybe your volunteers get to pick 2 items out of 5. So they get an extra item that they're taking with them, for their efforts. But I do see this as a common thing that people forget about because, to your point, Mary, it's the goodness of their hearts. And as a volunteer, you shouldn't be motivated by the thank you. I know when I volunteered at events, that's not my motivation, but I've definitely then noticed after an event as I'm leaving or even, days later that like that amount, it would have been nice to have some, recognition in the moment personally of the time that I'd given. Because it just, again, I feel like it closes the loop on that experience and leaves a positive impression for me as the volunteer, making me want to come back again. Which again, I think that's a big miss we see with a lot of clients. At least I had a couple years ago was a lot of volunteer attrition. So folks who'd volunteer one year and never come back again. And always a sign of a good event, I feel like, is having volunteers who like, hey, it's my 15th year doing this. It's like, wow, okay, they're onto something special if I'm getting you to come back. And a lot of times those organizations are doing like what you said, Mary, you guys did a volunteer party or just something to like really make sure those people feel special and celebrated and like their time is valued.
Absolutely. I think that's super important for sure. And then that brings us to number 6, which is client thank you cards and emails. So, Logan, thank you. This is like thank you emails, wrap ups, end of year gifts, etc. Tell us about that. Nice to have, must have.
I think this is a must have in whatever format feels good to you. Again, kind of echoing the sponsor moment where I think we kind of get all in the doing of the event and then we just kind of are done. But this can be interpreting listeners as like client. If you are someone who has clients, you're in an agency, you're independent, but it could even be as simple as like your leadership team or the like people, the stakeholders that you were reporting to. Like, I think it's just helpful to kind of acknowledge, the efforts that they did and the job well done. And so for me, again, I'm a physical thank you card gal, but you can even just writing a thank you email post event. Like those are also some positive memories I have from events of either me sending that off to the client sending me a quick blurb. Like that's just so nice to be like, oh, yes, again, we're accepting, we're acknowledging the amount of effort we all put in. And then my above and beyond, which again, I go into more depth in episode 82, but I do end of year gifts for some of my clients and team members, like people I've hired for events. And that's just a process I like. I like gift giving. I enjoy it. You do not have to do this, but like I make a company, Christmas card, holiday card, essentially end of year card that I send out. And that's just fun for me. And that's why I do it. In addition to then it's nice to kind of show my clients some love. But Mary, how about you? What's your kind of take on client thank yous?
I feel like I've learned some of this from you, I have to say, because yeah, I've started to do basically what you do, but probably not as well, which is just thank you cards. Thank you cards. And I have to say this for those clients that are particularly challenging, sometimes I'm like, do I want to write them a thank you card? But I've decided I'm just gonna do it anyway. It doesn't hurt. It's really easy. And maybe I do never talk to them again, but at least I'm ending with the thank you card. So
Exactly.
absolutely, it's easy to do. And then I do love end of year gifts. We try to do that around the holidays. And I think that's just fun to do. Gotta figure out what I'm gonna do this year, but think that's nice for sure. Yeah.
I do
Good.
still remember your custom edible EP events cookies that
Thank
were
you.
very adorable and delicious. That's the key. Are they both good
Yeah.
looking and delicious?
But this is the best time to bring up, we haven't talked about this in months, Logan's Chex Mix.
It is. We are almost at that time of year.
I can't believe we haven't talked about it yet. This is the stuff. This is the good stuff. Logan, one of Logan's best gifts if you're ever honored to try it.
There is, yes. Unfortunately, I'm a one-woman show with the making of the Chex Mix, so or not one woman. I get help from my partner Archie, but often there's only so much Chex Mix I can make. I still get really weird looks from the people at the grocery store when I buy them out of like all of their checks to try to make the amount that I like to make for friends, family, and yes, some of my event colleagues like Mary get to taste it as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
listeners, find your thing. I will say I did not invent Chex Mix. It's not a secret recipe. It's literally the one on the box. But it was a family tradition for the holidays that I just started doing for new friends and things like that. And I've carried it on and gotten many, many more people addicted to it. So you can find your own thing of like what you like to do. And last but certainly not least on our list of the 7 ways to show gratitude at events, we have planner thank yous. I feel like we started talking about this a little bit at each time, but Mary, how do we like to be thanked at events as the event planner or the event producer?
So I have been complaining about this lately to some people. So This is actually a hot button issue, but this is supposed to be a gratitude episode, so I'll try to keep it positive over here. So, no, truly, I think that as you kind of mentioned, we are getting paid for services and we don't necessarily need to be thanked. I think absolutely it's just human common courtesy to have a verbal thank you at some point. It's still a lot of work. We're still going to try super hard. So that's nice to hear. But I do sometimes I am conflicted, let's imagine this is like an event, it's a program. People are sitting down, they're watching a program, and they start to thank the sponsors, they thank the volunteers, they thank the staff, they thank like board members. Those are all very important people to thank. But do they thank the planning team? Not normally. And that's fine because they're like, without you, we couldn't make this happen. And I'm like, actually, without us, you probably couldn't make this happen. But that's okay. We don't have to be thanked publicly because we're getting paid. But still, so I'm conflicted about this right now. Sometimes I'm like, ooh, okay, because it's also really good advertising. To be frank, it would be a huge moment of gratitude for me if a client were to say like, and thanks to EP events, they were so much help. This was a great event. Just something as simple as that, right? Positive words about the company. That doesn't happen, and when I've seen it happen, it's because the planners themselves who have created the slideshows put their own things in there. They put their logo in there, they put it in the program, they put it in the script, but it's not the client doing it, it's the planner doing it, and the client happens to read it. So, anyway, I'm sorry, I am just going down a rabbit hole here. Logan, what do you think?
Mary's hot takes. I love this. We can get into this more later. I mean, I think, you know, so I hear your point. I feel like, and I know it can be coming, it's hard when it's coming from like current experience. I think for me, it's like, it doesn't matter so much. I feel like that's a nice to have if you get any public recognition at the event. I still feel weird when people say like, thank you, Logan. And I'm in the back of the room and it's just weird because no one knows really who I am. And to your point, I should interpret it as positive marketing, but I'm like, don't talk to the wizard behind the curtain. Like the wizard wants to stay behind the curtain. But I do feel you of like, you need to close the loop. You need a thank you. Like I will almost always want to send a thank you of some form to my client. And I just wish this was a must have for people to understand that like I would still count the planner or producer as an event vendor and send them a thank you after the event in email or text of some form, like some kind of written down recognition is like the minimum. I had one client once who it wasn't an event, but it was a like creative deliverable, a video I'd sent, and it took them a couple days to get back to me. And I'm not going to lie, in those moments, I was like, did they hate what I sent them? And I was like, no, Logan, just wait, interpret the silence as there. And I was like, she's also busy. It was like a really quick turnaround, urgent ask that I helped her out with. And later I then got the like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't say something earlier, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, just think if you're an empathetic person, like just in the moment within 24 hours, the next day, or maybe no more than 2 days later, sending a thank you to your planner or producer is going to be pretty amazing to make them feel good. I always screenshot them usually and I'll send them to my team if it's like general of saying, hey, Logan and the rest of the team was so great. But I do think, to your point, kind of some of what you're saying, Mary, is I do feel like sometimes we can get underappreciated. And sometimes it's our own fault because we're on to the next thing. It's just, okay, this event's over. I gotta get moving. But I've always appreciated when a client has taken the time to write a couple nice words, send them to me privately. I've tried to be better at sending people in my thank you email to them the links to my Facebook page, my company Facebook page, my company's Google listing, because only other people can put the nice things they say there. I can't like copy from an email and paste it there myself. So I'm like, hey, spread the word. Like that's does not cost you anything as an organization to publicly write 2-3 sentences about what it was like to work with me. And I have had people do that, like click on those links. It does show returns. If you are a small business owner, freelancer, please do this because it feels promoty, but it does help. And people do need that kind of nudge of like, here's the direct link to post a review because someone's going to go, and I know I've done this. I've been like, oh, I loved working with Mary. I should tell people about it. And I maybe just forget. And only if Mary sends me an email with her review being like, hey, can you take 2 minutes to write me a quick review so other people who are awesome like you can find me? Yeah, then maybe I'll pop in, just say Mary was awesome. So I think there's like a variety of ways, and the only miss is to just not say anything. And like you said, Mary, we are paid to be there. So like money is a part of it, but almost everyone we listed on this list is paid or compensated in some way. Maybe not the attendees, but I still think we should be thanked.
Nice to have for sure.
Must have. Must
Yes.
have at least a thank you, a private thank you.
Okay, that's true.
The rest of it, the public part. But before we wrap up, Mary, was there anything else you wanted to chat about with gratitude and events?
No, just to say, I do think that there are so many ways that we can do it. And I mean, think like from us, from a, planning and producing perspective, we're so grateful for all these people that were listed off. Like it's a super big team effort. And I think that overall, just gratitude and gratefulness for all the people to come in and make an event happen. So now we have our bonus tip for this episode, which Logan has for today.
Yes. Thank you, Mary. This week's bonus tip echoes a past bonus tip all about doing a year-end retreat with yourself or CEO day or check-in. But I challenge you, listener, we are at the end of November, but you still got about 5 weeks left in the year. And it is time to schedule that end of year retreat or check-in with yourself. You still have time to do it. I highly encourage you. This year I'm choosing to, instead of doing overnight, I'm just going to do a day. And I find if I change my environment, that's really helpful for me. So I've done them in coffee shops before, but I am going to be doing a full day at a local co-working space, change my location, change my, atmosphere. And that just helps me think big and reflect on what I loved from this year. What do I want to change? What do I want more of? What do I want less of? So schedule it. Don't forget it. Don't get to 2024 and realize you never had time to sit there and think about what you just did in 2023.
Love it. Great bonus tip for today and great reminder, Logan. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Better Events podcast. We hope you've had a moment to reflect on your gratitude for events and when you do events. We'd love for you to give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can visit our website at bettereventspod.com, and you can connect with Logan and I directly on LinkedIn as well. We love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Better Events podcast. We will be back with you again next Wednesday.